Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really landmark meta-analysis from Sabey and colleagues. They've synthesized 2 whole decades of research on the psychology of power. And the goal here? To finally settle years of debate and give us a clear, data-driven answer to how power truly affects us. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the foundational theory and why it got so confusing. Then we'll look at just how massive this new study really is before digging into the key results. From there, we'll unpack how power actually works. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with what this all means for the future. Okay, first things first. Let's get our heads around the theory at the very heart of this analysis. This model was proposed by Keltner and colleagues way back in 2003, and it pretty much became the dominant way of thinking about power for the next 20 years. And here it is, the Approach-Inhibition theory. It's actually a very elegant idea. It suggests that having high power flips on what's called a behavioral approach system, or BAS. Think of it as your brain's go system. It makes you focus on rewards, think more automatically, feel good, and generally act in a more uninhibited way. Now, on the flip side, low power is thought to activate a behavioral inhibition system, or BIS. This is your brain's stop system. It makes you zero in on threats, think more carefully, feel more negative emotions, and act in a much more cautious, inhibited way. It's a beautifully simple theory, right? But as researchers ran hundreds and hundreds of studies over the next couple of decades, the results weren't always so simple or clear-cut. This led to a huge critical question for the entire field. After all this time, after all this work, how well does this elegant theory actually hold up to the cold, hard data?
Well, all those conflicting results created what the researchers call a diagnostic gap. Basically, a fog of uncertainty rolled in. You had inconsistent findings. Some studies found support, others found weak or even contradictory effects. Then there was ambiguity about the causal path. Does power affect our behavior directly, or does it work through our thoughts and feelings? And that led to this big primacy debate. At its core, is power a thinking problem or a feeling problem? It was clear this fog needed to be lifted.
So how do you cut through a 20-year fog? Well, the researchers behind this study didn't just run another single experiment. No, they brought out a much more powerful tool to find a definitive answer.
And that tool is called a meta-analysis. You can think of it as a way of statistically combining the results from tons of individual studies, in this case 20 years worth, into one massive superpowered dataset. This lets you see the big picture, find the true overall effect, and draw conclusions that are way more solid than any single study could ever hope to provide.
And the scale of this thing, it's just staggering. I mean, to really get it, let's just look at the numbers. First up, the participants. We're not talking about a few hundred people here. The combined data set included data from over 250,000 individuals. That's just an incredible sample size. And where did all that data come from? Get this, it was pulled from 432 separate scientific manuscripts. And this includes not just published articles, but also unpublished dissertations, which is really important for avoiding bias and getting the complete picture. And digging even deeper, within those papers, they identified 813 independent samples. You can think of each one as a distinct group of people that was studied, every single one contributing a unique piece to this enormous puzzle.
And all of it, culminated in the analysis of 1,712 specific statistical effects. Every single one of those is a data point, testing the link between power and some psychological outcome. This is the raw material for the whole analysis.
And this just shows the full scope beautifully. This meta-analysis isn't just another study. It's a comprehensive synthesis of an entire field of research spanning 2 decades. By pulling all this data together, the authors created the most definitive dataset ever put together to really put the Approach-Inhibition theory to the test.
Okay, so with this incredibly powerful dataset in hand, what did they find? Did the theory actually hold up? Let's get into the core results.
First, let's look at the high-power approach system. The results here are crystal clear. The theory gets a big thumbs up. The meta-analysis found statistically significant positive links between high power and all 4 of its predicted outcomes. Specifically, more power is linked to more attention to rewards, more automatic thinking, and more disinhibited behavior. But the strongest link of all was with positive affect, or just feeling good. Now, these correlation numbers might look small, but in a meta-analysis of this size, they represent incredibly consistent and meaningful relationships. Bottom line, all 4 predictions for high power were confirmed.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The low-power inhibition system. For the most part, the theory held up here too.
Low power was reliably linked to focusing on threats, feeling more negative emotions, and acting in a more inhibited way. But, and this is a huge but, the data revealed a crucial anomaly. The predicted link between low power and more controlled, deliberate thinking, it just wasn't there. The correlation was essentially zero. This is a massive finding. It basically says that feeling powerless doesn't automatically make you a more careful, systematic thinker. That core idea of the original theory just isn't supported by this mountain of evidence.
So, the data pretty much validated the theory's outcomes, with one very important exception. But this amazing dataset also let the researchers go one step further and investigate the underlying mechanism. In other words, how does power actually make us do what we do? To figure this out, they tested what's called a mediation model. The idea here is that power doesn't just directly flip a switch on our behavior. Instead, its influence is channeled through these intermediate psychological states, our attention, our thinking, and our feelings. The model suggests these are the pathways power uses to exert its influence.
And this brings us right back to that primacy debate we talked about earlier. By testing this model, the researchers could finally answer that central question. Does power work primarily by changing how we think or by changing how we feel? Which of these paths is the real driver of our behavior? And the data provides a remarkably clear answer. Just look at the thickness of those arrows, which shows the statistical strength of each path. The effect of power on our behavior is overwhelmingly channeled through emotion. That indirect effect, via positive affect, is strong and statistically significant. And in stark contrast, the pathways through our thinking and our attention, they're basically flat, non-significant. The takeaway is just unmistakable. Power is an emotional experience first, and a cognitive one second.
All right, so let's pull all of this together. What is our final, refined understanding of power after all this, and where does the research go from here? After sorting through 2 decades of complicated, sometimes messy research, this meta-analysis gives us something incredibly clear, a 4-part summary of the theory as it stands today. It just cuts right through that fog and gives us a concise, almost clinical picture of how power really works. And here it is. First, the theory is largely validated. Its core predictions are well supported by the data. Second, the effect is asymmetric. That high-power go system seems to be stronger and more reactive than the low-power stop system. Third, the mechanism is primarily affective. Emotion, not thinking, is the main channel power uses to influence behavior. And finally, our understanding is now way more nuanced. We now know that idea of controlled, deliberate thinking isn't a reliable consequence of low power. And what's so great about this newfound clarity is that it provides a really solid launchpad for the future. Researchers can now move past just testing the basic model and start asking more complex, more fascinating questions. Like, how does power lead to moral licensing, where people feel like they've earned the right to act unethically? Or how do more complex emotions, like awe or envy, fit into this picture? And how do our own feelings of power shift and change from moment to moment?
And this all brings us to the powerful, practical take-on message that really distills everything we've just talked about. Treat power as an emotional state that disinhibits action. If you really want to understand why people with power act the way they do, for good or for ill, this landmark analysis shows us that the best place to start is by understanding power not as some kind of rational calculation, but as a deeply emotional experience.